The Man in the Yellow Suit. It was 1932, and the rain fell like clockwork over the grim streets of Chicago. The kind of rain that didn't wash the filth away, but instead buried it deeper into the cracks of the city. Private investigator Jimmy O'Hara was no stranger to those cracks. He lived in them, thrived on them, and made a living by prying open what others tried to keep hidden. But tonight, there was something different in the air, something darker. He was sitting in his smoke-filled office, sipping whiskey from a chipped glass when she walked in. The typical dame-red lipstick, tight curls, and a look in her eyes that could sink a ship. But what threw him off was her voice, low and trembling. "You have to help me," she said. "He's following me." Jimmy leaned back in his creaking chair, cocking an eyebrow. "Who's following you, sweetheart?" "The man in the yellow suit." Jimmy paused, the name ringing a bell in the back of his mind. He'd heard whispers around town, tales that no one dared speak too loudly. The man in the yellow suit was no ordinary stalker, he was a ghost. Some said he was an urban legend, others swore they saw him, standing at the edge of their vision just before something terrible happened. "I'm telling you, he's real," she pleaded, gripping the edge of his desk. "He was there the night my husband disappeared, and now he's coming for me." Jimmy sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Ghosts, legend, she didn't buy into any of it. But she was scared, and scared people made irrational choices. If she thought some boogeyman was after her, she'd pay good money for protection. "All right," he said, grabbing his coat. "Let's go find your yellow-suited friend." The streets were quiet that night, save for the steady patter of rain on the pavement. Jimmy and the dame, who finally introduced herself as Evelyn, walked the back alleys, following the trail of her husband's last known whereabouts. They ended up at a rundown speakeasy on the wrong side of town, the kind of place where the regulars looked like they'd knife you for looking at them wrong. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and whispered secrets. Jimmy flashed his badge, and the bartender pointed them toward the back room without a word. It was there, behind a locked door, that Jimmy first saw a large, faded poster, tacked to the wall, yellow with age. It showed a tall figure in a bright yellow suit, face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat. The caption read, "The man who knows all secrets, prepare to pay the price." Jimmy's blood ran cold. "This some kind of joke?" he muttered. But Evelyn wasn't laughing. She was staring at the poster, pale as a ghost. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the man." Before Jimmy could respond, the lights flickered. The air grew heavy, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the room, slow, deliberate, impossibly close. Jimmy whipped around, his hand on his gun, but the room was empty. "You feel that?" he muttered, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Something wasn't right. He'd been in enough scrapes to know when danger was near. Then the door creaked open behind them. A figure stood in the doorway, tall, imposing, and dressed in a pristine yellow suit, the fabric slick with the rain that hadn't touched him. His face remained hidden beneath the brim of his hat, but there was an undeniable presence. It felt like looking into the abyss. "I know your secrets, Jimmy O'Hara," the man said, his voice as smooth as silk but dripping with malice. Jimmy drew his revolver, aiming it squarely at the figure. "Stay back," he barked. The man in the yellow suit didn't move. Instead, he lifted his head just enough for Jimmy to catch a glimpse beneath the hat. And that was all it took. Jimmy froze, gun shaking in his hand. It wasn't a face under there. It was nothing, just a swirling black void, endless and hungry. "You're a smart man, Jimmy," the voice whispered, though the man's mouth didn't move. "But even the smartest can't hide forever." Jimmy tried to pull the bat trigger, but his body wouldn't respond. He felt paralyzed, as if something far more powerful than fear was holding him in place. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pulsing with a life of their own, shadows crawling from every corner. Suddenly, the man in the yellow suit reached out, his gloved hand extending unnaturally long. His fingers brushed against Jimmy's chest, and in that moment, a flood of images surged through his mind. Every sin, every dirty deal, every crooked case had ever worked. His life played before him in flashes of blood, betrayal, and regret. "You owe me a debt, Jimmy," the voice whispered, wrapping around his brain like a vice, "and it's time to pay." The last thing Jimmy heard was Evelyn's scream as the man's void-like face swallowed the room in darkness. 3 days later, Jimmy's body was found slumped in his office chair, a glass of whiskey in one hand and a single bullet hole through his chest. No sign of struggle, no forced entry. The police called it a suicide. But Evelyn knew better. She was there. She saw him, the man in the yellow suit, and now she was next.